Oh, sorry, I didn't stop and say.
Oh, that's okay.
No, she meant at Sienna when we had the presentation a few weeks ago.
Yeah, well, Paul taught yoga at 5:30, and I had to go change my clothes, put up my hair, and do all that. He can get changed very quickly, but if he doesn't.
My mom is the earliest person for everything, always. She has to be so early or else it stresses her out. And that's a good thing because I'm the opposite. I'm the latest person for everything. I'm just going to do a quick sound check here to make sure the online folks can hear. Where are we?
Your daughter was just in India?
She lives there.
Oh, you live there?
She's just here visiting. She's going tomorrow, actually. She's been here for 3 weeks.
Oh, how do you like it?
Oh, good. I've been there for a while now. It's good.
It's cold, huh?
Yeah.
Bombay?
Bombay.
What do you do there?
My husband and I run restaurants,
Oh.
so that, exists.
Yeah. What kind of restaurants?
Southeast Asian food.
Sounds good.
Your glass is tipsy.
No. I told him that. Oh, it's got a hole in that smoke.
There, a dimple. Oh,
Better.
Yeah, these things like
Hello.
Hello. I'm testing that. Check.
hey, it's good to see you again.
Oh, hi. How's it going? Good. Glad you're here. It is 2:30, 2:31. All right, let's do a short meditation to get started like normal, to harmonize ourselves. All right, just sit tall. We may have some people walking in during the meditation, and that's fine. We'll just let them come on in and have a seat. All right. With the eyes closed. Let's start off with chanting an Om together. Inhale. And just allow that sound to just stay with you. The physical vibrations do dissipate, but the subtle vibrations remain. Just allow the vibrations of your lower nature, your lower bodies, and your emotions and mind just calm down and harmonize. Settling in, tuning up, preparing for a spiritual study. Just a moment or two more of silence. Smooth inhales and smooth exhales. Let's join together in another Om. Inhale. Om. and slowly come back. And we open our eyes and there are more people in the room.
Sorry, and we were late either.
We have another chair coming our way. Good to see
I don't
everyone.
think we were late.
Oh.
Were we late?
Sure.
I thought we were so on time, and I'm talking about killing a chicken.
Ah.
We started it too.
We started, no.
She wanted to start it
We got here
too.
too. I was like, gosh, you come on, hurry up. We got here and there was no one here. I said, no one's coming today. And
So to our online students, I just want
Here's a
everyone to
chair.
see
That's
who's here.
here's a chair.
That's funny.
How about that?
That's right.
Genevieve.
All right, welcome everyone. So we have a nice full house in person. Thank you all for coming and being here. We have several online viewers as well. So from time to time, we'll have questions from our Facebook world, and I'll read the question or comment, and then we can discuss. And most of you know about this little microphone right there. So that's designed to pick up any questions that we have here, so our online students can hear you. So everyone will hear everyone. Rhonda's on. Hopefully Eugene can join. Sometimes we have international folks as well. We have a student in Australia who might be joining us as well. All right, this is our 6th session, going strong. Last session we finished up the talk about human beings and our bodies, also known as the koshas, the different levels of our existence. And we're going to use the theory discussed in that chapter to talk about what happens to our consciousness after the physical body ceases to live, after we transition. So chapter 5 is always a good one, always a very juicy topic to discuss, and also a controversial one. This is also a hot button topic for certain people who are religious in nature and who have grown up with an idea of what happens to us after we leave the physical world. So there are lots of different opinions and teachings on what does happen after the physical body dies. So get ready for the theosophical teaching on that. So it's sure to be a hit.
It's
Sure to be a hit.
this is well, first of all, it's a topic that I have always been interested in, even as a child. I remember when I was very young, I used to like going to funerals. I lived in a very small town, so if anyone in town died, school was closed, and most kids took a day off, but I wanted to go to the funeral. And I'll tell you why, because it was one of the few times when people were serious about what life was all about. It annoyed me that most people were just more interested in baseball and school events and social activities, and I'm like, there's got to be more to life than that. And so when people actually got serious about what life was all about, I'm like, that was interesting to me. There's very little information in general about dying. We're learning, the scientific world is learning a little bit more about it, but it's a very unknown, uncharted territory. Each of the religions has their viewpoint on it, and there are some similarities and some differences. Even in theosophy, there's not a whole lot of information. And even then, as Paul will explain, there are a couple of competing theories. So I am very interested in what theosophy does have to say, and yet you have to search very carefully to even find that information. It's just not readily available.
So where does the information actually come from then? So we have several sources for what we're going to be talking about today. And Terry and I just made up half of it.
We just
On the way over.
Exactly.
say whatever the voices in our head tell us to.
Well, some of it comes from clairvoyance, people who are sensitive. And we've talked about this many times, and we'll continue to share our thought on what clairvoyance and clairaudience and clairsentience actually is. It's a heightening of your sensitivity and your receptivity. It's nothing different than any of us can do already. It's just a higher, more refined level of it. Our physical senses can only do so much, and yet they can do more than what we practice with them. So hearing only exists within a certain range of vibrations. Seeing only exists within a certain range of vibrations. We can expand those ranges via our 5 senses, and then we can use our higher senses as well. And the higher senses is in conjunction with the 5 physical senses is what being psychic and is really all about. It's raising our awareness, our sensitivity. So that's one source for the information. It's from clairvoyants and seers, also known as rishis, people who can see things that other people can't. What's another source? The religion traditions.
Yeah.
Religions from all over the world all have something to say about what happens after the physical body dies. So a tremendous amount of information can be received and processed from religions. And then we have near-death experiences. So people who have approached dying and who've been medically pronounced dead and have come back from that experience share what happened. So those are the 3 main sources of the information that's contained in this chapter, chapter 5.
Just as an aside, science is, of course, is skeptical, and as well it should be. So a lot of scientists are skeptical about near-death experiences, and the reason that they, as they explain, is it is near death. It isn't death. So far, we've not had anyone that science can identify and verify that actually died and then came back and told everybody what happened. They get very close to it, but then they don't cross over.
Okay. Even in the theosophical world, as Terry mentioned, there are 2 different views of what does happen to the consciousness after the physical body dies. And as we get into the different sections or different stages of awareness, we'll talk about who believes or teaches what and why versus the other group. And so there are 2 main, and I guess we can generally say that the originators, the founding fathers, so to speak, even though HPB was a woman, the founding fathers of the Theosophical Society have one view, and then the later leaders have a second view, more or less.
Do you want me to explain how that came about?
Please. You have much better knowledge.
I'm the historian.
Yeah.
The Mahatma letters, we often refer to those Mahatma letters, were letters written between 1880 and 1885. And they were specifically written by 2 different adepts, Mahatmas, Kutumi and Morya. And they were written to 2 Englishmen. Sinnott, A.P. Sinnott, was the editor of the, I forget the name of it was a prominent English language newspaper in India. It wasn't the Times. And then I think it was the Pioneer. And then the other one was A.O. Hume, who was kind of the equivalent of a cabinet secretary for the English government at the time. So he had a fairly high level of position in the English and British government in India. So he also, by the way, for Natasha, A.O. Hume was considered the founder of the what is it called? The political party, the Indian Congress.
Oh, okay.
In the Congress Party. So yeah, this was in the late 1880s when he founded the a political party that is still in existence today. He was also a world-known ornithologist. He had a museum with thousands of stuffed birds. After he discovered theosophy, though, he stopped collecting.
No more killing the birds. Don't shoot anymore.
Anyway, these letters were private and they weren't meant for publication. So during his lifetime, A.P. Sinnott, who collected the letters, made sure that they didn't get published. A few of them were hand copied and passed around to individuals in the Theosophical Society, but for the most part, he kept them in a box and they never saw the light of day. However, he had instructions that when he died, which happened in 1823, they were to be published. 1923. Thank you.
Good catch, Roger.
And so in the meantime, Leadbeater and Annie Besant had been doing clairvoyant investigation, and they came up with a whole collection of teachings about what happens on the astral plane and what happens after death, et cetera, et cetera. And then the book came out, the Mahatma letters, and it told something very different. And let's see, Leadbeater wasn't real thrilled when the book came out because it did contradict some of the things that they said. So that's where the two competing teachings come from. Personally, I have a lot more faith in the Mahatma letters. They were written by adepts, people who supposedly know. And the others were things that came about from clairvoyants who, it's hard to say just how accurate any given clairvoyant is.
Kenny made a mistake one time of asking me, what should we study next? And I said, let's study the Mahatma. 3 years later, we finished.
Did you actually finish the book though?
Oh yeah, we did. We did. Well, it took the Hispanic group in LA even longer.
Yeah.
Paul and I would go visit them every year, and they'd be 50, 100 pages farther along in the book. But every time they were still studying the Mahatma letters.
Didn't Annie Besant have some conjecture also? I mean, based on information she received?
She actually became very politically involved in India. She was very involved in the independence movement. Yeah, there were statues of her in Madras. What is it called now? Chennai. They changed all the names. So she was very prominent. She actually kind of was opposed to Mahatma Gandhi. They had differing points of view. He was a little more militant, but in a pacifist way. She wanted more diplomacy and felt that they needed to work with the British government and try to do it that way. The Indian people, they wanted the more dramatic way of, and as it worked out later, when they weren't able to get independence for decades, they realized that Annie Besant was probably right. Her way would have probably succeeded faster, but it did finally occur in 1947. Yeah. So they did finally become independent, and members of the Theosophical Society had a lot to do with it.
It actually is really interesting to see how the Theosophical Society changed a little bit of its direction with this second generation of leaders. Would you consider Besant and Leadbeater to be the second generation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Not a discussion for today, really, but it is interesting. So the founders in conjunction with the adepts, the enlightened masters who were the impelling force, propelling force behind the creation of the society. That was the first generation, and then Besant and Leadbeater, and actually John Algeo, the actual author of this book, kind of follows in line with that. But it's interesting to see the slight difference in opinions, and maybe a different time we'll have more of an in-depth history lesson on the differing views and the difference of path. So
just on the general topic of dying and death, the process itself has a lot of periods of unconsciousness. Of course, our life has periods of unconsciousness. Every time we sleep, we're unconscious.
The 70s were unconscious.
Whole decade.
So one of the things that is important to realize when we talk about someone having eternal life, remember the prayer of St. Francis at the very end. It says, and it is in dying that we obtain eternal life, or are born to eternal life. Well, you can define the eternal life however you want, but a definition that makes sense to me is that there is no loss of consciousness. If you have eternal life, that means life goes on, conscious life goes on, to me. So everybody that I know wouldn't qualify for having eternal life because they have periods of unconscious. It's almost like you die and then you come back to life again. Every night you do. So only the adepts and those who have achieved a certain level of awareness, comprehension, and ability can go all the time, 24 hours a day, without any loss of consciousness. That, to me, is what eternal life would qualify for. So it's just something to keep in mind that not everyone has these. Well, they will have periods of unconsciousness, but after several thousand years, not like we do after every day and at the end of our life.
to put that in more technical terms, last session we talked about the koshas, the bodies. So the physical body is the most coarse, the most dense vehicle that we use. And it is certainly not eternal, and it's certainly not ever energetic. It needs periods of rest. We need to sleep. This body needs to sleep. But that doesn't mean that our consciousness needs to be broken. And what Terry is describing is when we refine the different koshas, the lower mental body, the higher mental body, we'll learn to retain awareness at those levels, even when the physical body is sleeping. It's a similar phenomenon that happens during samadhi in yoga, in Raja Yoga, when we learn to meditate at the highest level, where our consciousness intentionally leaves the physical body and either merges with the object of meditation that we're focusing on, the seed object or seed thought, or we achieve cosmic consciousness. And if you picture that idea of a yogi in a cave meditating like this, his physical body is alive and well and there, but the consciousness is not in his physical brain at that point. His physical body is being maintained by elemental consciousness or just body consciousness of sorts, but his consciousness is left. And when we learn how to do this intentionally, that's when this non-breaking happens every night of consciousness. And then again, when the physical body dies, that's when we can maintain awareness as well. That's far in advance for myself and most of us. It's important to talk about cycles. Now, setting up some foundationary information here. Oh, did I skip something?
Well, just one thing that I want
please.
to point out is there's always been a discussion among people, and especially in science, as to whether or not there is any continuation of consciousness. A lot of scientific people say no, there's no evidence for it, so therefore we have to assume that it doesn't exist. We think that there is, and that there's fairly good evidence of it, which we will point out, and that nature doesn't make mistakes. Well, it does make mistakes, but it corrects them. Yes.
Sometimes not quickly.
So we're going to be talking about the consciousness that occurs. There's one thing that a lot of people believe, whether they're religious or not, who do believe in the continuation of consciousness, and that is that they believe that we will know everything once we die. And Theosophy just doesn't teach that at all. To me, it doesn't make any sense that we kind of bumble through life unaware and unable to comprehend, and then all of a sudden we become enlightened as soon as the physical body dies. To me, that doesn't register.
See, to me it does.
Oh, really?
Yeah, what a surprise.
Okay.
No, it does register in that, in my mind's eye and in my belief system, we come back in reincarnation to a physical body, and there are things that we come back to learn. And I think if there was too much consciousness in that learning period, which is a life, we wouldn't understand it. So that's why we're kept sort of in the dark about the full knowledge, because we're learning a specific portion that we agreed as when in spirit, me in my spirit, or me in my higher self, agreed to come back and do. And if I came back to do all those things and I had this great consciousness of, okay, here's everything, but this is a small segment of it that I'm going to learn, I don't know how that would determine how much I do learn, because I know too much. But if I don't know anything and I come back to learn specific things, I think that is more apparent in the soul's growth. Did I?
Okay, so in your way of thinking, after you die, you're fully aware of how everything works, and then during a lifetime, you're purposely constricted in your understanding.
Limited.
Okay, I
Like
understand.
Saturn, the planet Saturn would limit us and take us slowly through things, so
Right.
we learn it.
So then I think the question is whether or not you are fully in touch with your higher self even after death. So that to me would be the question. And again, we want to point out we aren't dogmatic about the way we believe. It's quite certain that we're wrong on a lot of things and that we have a lot to learn. So we don't pretend to know everything.
I have a question though.
Yes.
If we do know everything at that point, what is the need to come back here and relearn it? If we are awakened to all things, what is the purpose of coming back here and working on?
Well, to me, that's like a big blackboard. Okay, so now we leave this incarnation and we go back into spirit, and there's this great knowledge, and I think that great knowledge is for everyone to experience, and you experience that great knowledge through little bits and pieces in lifetimes. So when I go back, I could say, okay, I do want to go back again. It is my inclination, or whatever word I would use, to go back and live a life and learn more about this consciousness. Because I know on my soul's, the integral lines, I mean, this is how I explain it, for lack of better phraseology, but the indelible lines of my soul through the lifetimes of what I've learned carry into the next lifetime, right? I mean, we've talked about this, you and I. And so,
Well, I just don't believe that we know everything I don't think we're all knowing once we cross over, because then I don't see
I don't know.
the point of coming back here and suffering through a lot of things that we do have to suffer through. If we have, I think there's certain things that we have to work out that require us to come back. And if we were all knowing, that requirement wouldn't be there.
But we are, that's not what I'm saying. I'm
Okay.
not saying that we're all knowing. I'm saying the knowledge is there. And as an individual, I don't know all those things. So I'm hi. So I'm debating with my spirit, okay, I see this consciousness crossed over, and I know there's a knowing in my soul. I know what I know, what I know. I don't know this part of consciousness, and I want to learn that. And I will learn that by taking another incarnation. That's the way I do it. No, I agree that we don't know everything. That's why we come back. And even if we come back to teach, we also learn in doing that. And so that creates more of those invisible lines in my soul, or on my soul, that contribute to my knowing.
Let me add a couple things to this conversation. So there are some teachings that come from Theosophy and from the yoga tradition. So we've talked about this chart many times, and I'm holding it up for the online students. So check out this side, the planes of our solar system, where we have the divine plane, which would be the absolute or God. This is the undifferentiated mind of God. And then we have several layers below that, monadic and atmic. Now, these are somewhat vague and abstruse to talk about, but we have consciousness on those levels. So I'd like to offer that at some level, we are all-knowing. The spark of divinity is all-knowing, but it's not fully awakened yet. And then as we move down into materiality, Atma or spirit, we've talked about this, that might be the highest level of our individualized self that is changing and growing through our body's experiences on the earth. So there's a part of us that is unchanging, and there's a part of us that is changing. And it's a little bit hard to describe the difference between the monad and the Atma or spirit, but at some level, there's a part of us that is it's the drop of water that's part of the ocean that we were describing. That's the unchanging part of us, which would be all-knowing. The Sanskrit term for that is Paramatma, Paramat, the all-soul or the oversoul. And then individual Atma or spirit would be the part of us that is changing through the incarnating vehicles which gain experience. So I'd like to offer that we're both right. There's some level of us that is all-knowing, and then there's some level that is growing and retaining the experiences. And guess what? None of those are actually permanent either. Our soul, as permanent as we think it seems permanent from the perspective of our physical body. It lasts 700, 1,000, 1,500 lifetimes, our soul, but that's not permanent. At some point, we'll become a master of wisdom ourselves, and then the soul won't be necessary. And Terry described this too. The monad replaces the soul for the masters, and then at some point, they won't need that either, and they'll be. So those are levels that that's challenging for us to even comprehend. But when the physical body dies, and this is the subject of the next chapter, reincarnation, when the physical body dies, the Atma or spirit or higher mind in different language, higher self, absorbs all the essence of the experience from this incarnation. And that's the part of us that is expanding and growing, but that's not the monad. The monad is what you might be referring to, all-knowing, ever-changing. But I don't believe, and I don't think Terry does either, that believes that our consciousness actually gets to the monadic level until far along in our development when we're close to reaching adeptship.
And who knows how long that is?
It's 700. I've heard an average of 777 lifetimes. So
that to me is a little.
700 lifetimes in a physical body. That seems a lot to me. Depends on our rate of advancement. How fast do we
some
go?
are fast and some are slow.
I think it depends on how much we learn.
Are you going to talk about I know you are.
We're going to talk about the whole chapter.
Okay, because I found something in this that's fascinating.
Oh.
It made me understand what Terry and I have spoken about before, about talking to those people or spirits who have crossed over. And I read this chapter, the last paragraph on the emotional body in Life After Death, the last paragraph on page 28. And it says, a person who has lived a life governed by strong, coarse desires is, however, awake to the vibrations of that type in a sort of purgatory. There is no physical pain, of course, but that person must contend with desires that cannot be fulfilled because the physical vehicle needed to satisfy them no longer exists. To me, in my world, That's called getting stuck. Okay? The spirit has gotten stuck.
Before we address that, though, let's address some other preliminary processes before we get to that section, though. But we're certainly going to talk about that.
Okay.
That's a main part of the chapter.
Yeah,
We're certainly going to get to that.
that makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense. We're slow. We're gonna get there. It might be next session, but we have all this groundwork to set up too, because there's so much foundational background information to talk about. I think it's all important to hear.
We repeat a lot of things,
Yeah.
as you know. Each class, we'll revisit and we'll look ahead. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is because you have to assimilate this information and look at it from many different points of view. And you have to apply it in different ways. And without the reminders, you may hear it one time and it may or may not make much sense. But without these reminders, we don't revisit it and re-look at it and try to figure it out from a different point of view. And once you make progress in various different subject matters, you look back at it and you see it completely differently. So there's a reason for this. We're not just talking in circles. And
I talk in circles sometimes.
I noticed in the Mahatma letters, the Mahatmas do exactly the same thing. They will say the same thing again and again in slightly different language, and each time you get just a little bit more insight.
This would be a good time to bring up one of the questions. We like to send out several questions earlier in the week for contemplation to get your juices flowing on the topic. And the first question was, is it rational to think that consciousness ends when the physical body dies? So probably no one in this room thinks that it's not, that it isn't rational to think that. I have some friends who believe that, yep, that's all there is. When the brain is done, it's black and that's it. That's the whole lifetime is done and then there's no more. But our question is it rational? Would it make sense that everything just ends when this physical body dies? So what do we think? Is it rational to think that, or is it rational to think that consciousness continues at some level? Okay. Yes.
Okay, so when we look at the universe, the physical universe, the planets and beyond the solar system and everything is a cycle. It starts over and over and over. And just like the physical body goes to dust, I think our consciousness goes back also to the source and to the big field that exists out there in the universe. So I think that it's a perpetual cycle. And from that perspective, we never die.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we always die, one or the other. But
That's
it's the same
interesting.
thing.
It's an interesting point you bring up. And I'm so glad that you mentioned cycles, because we have a whole section in our notes here about all the different cycles of nature. And if anyone has skimmed through our book that we've written, Ancient Wisdom for a New Age, there's a whole chapter on the cycles of nature and how the human life cycle is no different than what you just said. Macrocosmic cycles mirror microcosmic cycles, and our physical body's life cycle is somewhere in between the two. So yes, everything is a cycle. And even you said the physical body turns to dust. Well, guess what? When the physical body goes to dust, what happens then? Plants grow out of it, and then animals eat the plants, and then even the physical body never actually disintegrates. Matter can never be created or destroyed, just transformed. Yeah. So cycles are very important. This is support for our rationale. This is why theosophy makes so much dang sense, because this idea of cycles is support of the continuity of consciousness at some level. And the method by which, or the nature of that consciousness, is different for everyone depending on our level of advancement, if we do believe in this evolution of consciousness over lifetime to lifetime. So we could go into more cycles, but we're going to be talking about that, I'm sure, in many different chapters. Anything that we want to mention in this section, the Hindu period of? Yes, okay. So different cultures and different teachings talk about phases of life. So within the human life cycle, there are stages, and it's no mystery. There's always kind of, in every cycle, there's this idea of growth and expansion, full-blown activity, full bloom, and then contraction and slowing down, and then rest. That cycle appears in the seasons, in the human body, in the cycles of planets, solar systems, everything, flowers, plants, everything. And the Hindu tradition has this idea of 3 sections of 25 years of physical body existence. So the first 25 years of a person's life would be one. The second, roughly, not exactly 25 years. It could be 20, it could be 30, something around. Could be that, 27. What not a lot of us consider, though, is that the fourth section is very important as well. So 25 years, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, and that's generally considered to be the end of the physical incarnation. But then what's the name for the 4th section?
Bardo.
Bardo. Has anyone heard that word before?
Which is not even a Sanskrit name, it's a Tibetan name.
What does it mean?
Bardo, what does it mean?
It's the section of the cycle from the death of the physical body to the rebirth of the next. That's part of the
I
cycle.
just got goosebumps.
That's part of the cycle. The cycle doesn't end at the death. It ends at the rebirth of the next.
Does it end?
What's that?
Yes, it does it end.
Well, we're talking
Exactly.
about the one cycle, but
One
most people
round.
talk about from birth to death as being the cycle. It's
Right.
birth to the next birth. So it's that unknown, hidden part of the cycle that we're talking about today.
So let's talk about preparing for Bardo, preparing for that 4th phase, which is taboo in our society. Nobody wants to talk about death. I'm really glad that my mother has prepared and planned so much because she's lessened the mystery and the worry. We've gone through so many meetings with her, the mortuary lady, planning everything. It's not easy to do that. It's not easy, but she's done it because she's preparing and planning. And if you just talk about it more, just think about it more, the mystery lessens and the fear is mitigated of death. It doesn't have to be taboo. Other cultures honor dead bodies so much more than we do here in the Western world. And it's not as scary for a lot of other cultures. But for us, it's this crazy idea that no one wants to talk about or approach.
It didn't used to be that way. People in the old days didn't go to a mortuary for a funeral service or to view a body. They had wakes at home. The body would be, at the home in the parlor for
The parlor.
2 or 3 days.
Parlor.
And people would come and sit and they would, share stories and mourn together and eat together and drink together. And it was the tradition. But at some point in the 1900s, everything became more sanitized.
Mm.
Oh, you can't have a dead body in the house. So you keep it at the mortuary and you go visit it, but not in the house. So we became much more sanitized. But to me, I think it's a little more natural the other way. And for one thing, children grow up completely unexposed to any of that. Of course, death used to occur more often in the old days when they didn't have good sanitation and when they didn't understand germ theory, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of children, knew a number of people who died. Today, it's very uncommon for even young adults to know anyone that has died.
So preparation is key. So Theosophy gives us this wonderful teaching on how to make this Bardo state, this after death life, as comfortable as possible for us. And there's preparation work to do on behalf of the person nearing death and on the loved ones and people nearby. So it's important to talk about it. It's important to understand that it's approaching, and it's important to begin to let material things fall away and to practice what we say every class, non-attachment. When you're so attached to the physical world, this plays into what you were bringing up, Jerry. When a person is so attached to things emotionally, of course physically, obviously things, but emotionally, the after-death state is affected tremendously. So preparing, understanding that we can't take it with us, That's the thing my dad always says. Well, I'm going to spend all my money now because I can't take it with me. Well, he could be more responsible with his money, but that's his rationale. I'm just going to spend it because I can't take it with me. But it's true,
what's the
though.
saying?
You can't argue against that.
Yeah, someone said, I want to make sure that the last check I write bounces.
That's funny.
That is funny. So letting go. Eckhart Tolle, we love to quote him. He's one of our favorite authors. In his book, A New Earth, he talks about this idea of letting go and releasing the attachment. And he says that something curious happens to your own energy. You become more vibrant, actually. When you release your attachment to the physical realm and you spend more time in quiet contemplation, understanding that this physical body may be dying soon, Eckhart Tolle says people become actually luminous, lighter, radiant almost, because they're starting the transitionary process already. We're not so dense. We're not so dark and hard like a rock, for example. We're more like a flame, more like spirit itself. So that can be done energetically in the time leading up to a physical body's death.
Years ago, I did volunteer work for Nathan Adelson Hospice. It was at a time where hospices were still kind of a new concept. And I wanted to contribute and do something that I thought was meaningful. I think I was around 28, maybe 30 when I did that. But it was very enlightening to see different people's attitudes toward an impending death, and especially to interact with family members. A lot of family members just wouldn't confront it, wouldn't accept it. A lot of them would stay away because they just couldn't deal with it. And they were the same ones that when the person was actively dying would rush in and be all in a panic. Do something, you can't just let them die. And they're the ones who didn't show up to help when the person, it was in the earlier stages. So there are a lot of different attitudes, and I don't say they're wrong. It's just that they look at it differently from the way I look at it. But in general, if a person is dying and know that they're dying, there are two different things. They either accept it or they don't accept it. And the one who doesn't accept it has a really rough time because they are adamant, I'm going to fight this thing, I'm going to fight it.
I'm going to win.
And it's just like the war on drugs. Whenever you turn it into a war, I'm going to fight this thing, guess what? You're supplying the energy for both sides of the war. You're fighting against yourself. And it's very debilitating. It has a tremendous cost. So those people who fight against it, and I'm not saying that if you find out you have cancer that you shouldn't try to see if it can be cured. I know people who have been cured of cancer. And so I don't say don't try that, but don't be attached to the outcome. And that's easier to say than to do it. But if you can get to that point, then you are in a much better space and you're actually more apt to be able to recover because you're under less stress. Whenever you create stress in your life, your immune system just drops to nothing. So the less stress and acceptance is an eliminator of stress, you have a much better chance of actually recovering. And yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. In the case of my mother, you talk about translucence, because I was there when she died. I swear, every wrinkle from her face, just, they were gone.
Wow.
Just at the last few breaths, it was luminous. There was the light. I know that. Something you said, and I have to question it, and that would be, you said, you turn dust to dust, and then we replenish the earth. Well, now then, we've got the question of cremation versus being buried in concrete. And then we can't fulfill that purpose of replenishing the earth. So what's your feeling about that?
Do you want to?
Well, the ashes of, for the result of cremation have lots of minerals in them.
Right.
They're still excellent fertilizer.
Exactly.
Were you asking
Why
our
do
opinion?
people choose to be in concrete?
Oh,
But
you're asking
even,
the opinion.
even then, within a certain number of years, the body still disintegrates, no matter how much you try to preserve it. Even the Egyptian mummies don't last forever. They've been able to preserve them for 5,000 years maybe, but
The
they
concrete doesn't
still
even
don't
last
last forever. And
Concrete?
The concrete will disintegrate at some point too.
and it is interesting that more and more people are choosing cremation. Maybe we'll have an even better solution at some point, because cremation uses up a tremendous amount of energy. You have to have a fire that's very hot.
We'll just ascend.
Yes.
I kind of like to think about it as a different kind of transmutation. It's just a different process.
Yeah.
And when you bring in the fire, which is to me very linked to the light, you're bringing a form of purification that does not exist for me when you are going into the ground. You just return and it's a smoother, maybe slower, more natural process. But I think that the fire and the light bring that opportunity for purification and really letting go more of all the things that you want to let go in this life and not come back with in the next.
If you have strong feelings about how you want your funeral and your body to be treated after death, please make sure you make your family members aware of that. Sometimes we never know when death can occur. It can be very rapid, and you may not have time to tell them if you haven't told them ahead of time. So please make sure that they know what you want done. And better thing to do is have it all in writing and everything pre-planned.
So we've talked about the idea of preparation, tying up loose ends, beginning to release attachment to physical things. Terry always tells the story about his mother, how she would make sure that she had no unresolved issues with any people. She'd make phone calls, and this is wonderful, because you're not carrying any emotional ties or any negative unresolved. It's basically eliminating karma, right? It's beautiful how he describes how she did that. She made phone calls to people.
It was basically a 3-year process. The last thing that she wanted to make sure of was that she was still alive to take care of my father before he died. So once he passed, then she felt like she had done all of her life's work. And she had one bout of cancer and had surgery and chemotherapy and the whole thing. And so she actively was preparing for the day she died. So she would write in her journal pages every day. And she gave away almost everything. She's like, I don't need this. Why don't you take this? I don't have any use for it. And she, like Paul said, she would call people up and say, are we square on everything? Is there anything that I haven't resolved with you? And she made sure there were no unresolved issues with anybody. And so when she found out she had cancer again, she's like, okay, I'm not going to fight it. I'm not going to do anything. And she, within 7 weeks, she passed. But it was very calm, very peaceful, and she did it her way. And it was, I thought, that's about as theosophical as you can get. And she didn't know anything about theosophy.
She was Mormon.
She was Mormon.
That's interesting.
So I learned a lot from that.
It's a very appropriate teaching, though, about the idea of being calm. So the actual process of death, Terry was mentioning how he served in the hospice. They know that the hospice workers understand that being calm and quiet is very, very important. And allowing the transition to happen, allowing it to happen, it always comes back to vairagya, non-attachment, understanding, being able to let go. It's hard. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy at all, but I'm saying it affects the after-death state, and it affects karma as well. If you hold on and if you won't let a loved one go. And we're even taught here that if we have feelings of attachment and anger or resentment for the dying person or towards the dying person, it actually makes it uncomfortable for them, spiritually speaking. And it might even impede their transition.
Yeah, that was
Isn't that interesting? Wow.
That really
So the moment
makes
of death
sense.
needs to be quiet and calm. And I don't think John Algeo, the author, talks about angels, but you have, from your study of the Mahatma letters.
It's not mentioned in there. This is just from personal experience. Jeffrey Hodson, a theosophical writer, does mention it, that, and I have had some personal experience with it on the end of life part, that angels are present at different times, but always specifically at 2 points in a person's life: the moment of birth and the moment of death. And my own experience with death was that there were 2 angels. I had a friend who was terminal, who was dying, but there was no indication that it was going to be immediate. And one early morning, I was meditating, and I saw him lying in a hospital bed, and there was an angel at the foot and an angel at the head of the bed, just perfectly calm, just not doing anything except, radiating light and peace and calmness. And other people were in various states. One very agitated, and the rest very calm. And I saw the whole thing just like a vision. And an hour or 2 later, I got a phone call and described everything except the angels, exactly the way I had seen it. So I, as far as I know, that is correct, that there are angels present at the moment of birth and at the moment of death.
Kind of ushering the process along and guarding and guiding the process. The life review is attested to by many clairvoyants, many people who have experienced near-death experiences, and in most religion traditions, the life review. So what is this life review? People will say, "Oh, my life flashed before my eyes." It's a discharging of memory in the physical brain as the physical brain begins to shut down. A discharge of all of the important points in a person's life, quickly passing through consciousness, not because they're being lost or wiped away, just a discharge of energy.
And this is a very common occurrence in those who've had near-death experiences. It doesn't always occur, but many of them have mentioned this life review, this seeing their entire life within a matter of seconds. And Theosophy teaches that it does occur. Your physical brain, everything, and what is recorded is not like a camera and a tape recorder. It's your perception of what occurred, the emotions, the feelings, the thoughts that occurred. That's what is recorded. And from early as infant childhood up until the moment before, everything is recorded in the brain. This is one of the reasons why hypnosis is helpful sometimes to jog people's memories when they can't remember something that happened. It is recorded in there, and apparently when the person dies, and this is mentioned in the Mahatma letters, there is a life review, and that's the last thing that the brain does is to discharge all of those memories, and you review them.
Do we know about the vision of light? Most people, no matter their religion, have this vision of a being of light or walking towards the light. I don't think Aljeo mentions that, but
No,
that's a
that,
common
that
thing.
too is very common in near-death experiences. And the interesting thing about it is some people say that it was Jesus or
the Buddha,
any
Krishna.
religious, yeah, it could be Krishna if you're Hindu, or they, but, and a lot of people just don't know who it is. It's just a being of light. And the most likely scenario is that it is, it could very well be your higher self. And most likely that's what it is, this being of light. And most people associate something with that, you know, an angel, Jesus, Buddha,
A loved
Krishna,
one.
a loved one. Could maybe sometimes they associate it with a family member who has passed on.
But our higher self could serve as any one of those figures, our soul, our true nature.
And to come back to what I was saying earlier with the cycles that are happening in the cosmos. Really, when we die in this condensation and ultimate contraction, what comes out of that is the supernova, which is the light. And so if somebody is dying, they are getting closer to the process where they are contracting to the ultimate point, and then are going to be reborn as initially as the light. So for me, that being vision of the light and being called by the light and drawn to it, to me, that's what it evokes.
That's a pretty cool insight, right?
The Mahatma letters, there's only a couple of them that deal with the death and dying process, don't mention the being of light. So whatever information I've come across is just information that I've encountered on my own.
This, in Daniel Brinkley's book, Saved by the Light, have you read that?
Yes, he lives here, you know.
He's a friend of mine.
Ah, okay.
And I, in fact, we were talking about this. I was there the other night, and we were talking about that last moment. He said he was walking through walls. He didn't know he's following the ambulance, and he's walking through walls, and he didn't realize he was walking through walls. And one of the first things he saw were beams of light. And before the beams of light was Life Review. And he said, I saw everything, and he was a CIA operative. So he had knocked out villages in Vietnam. And he killed a lot of people. And he said the pain, it was excruciating to him. The pain, he understood the pain that he created.
Mm-hmm.
For other
Felt
people.
it. He felt it himself.
He felt it, and it was excruciating. So I think that, there's so much that does happen after the physical body shuts down. I'm kind of excited myself. Yeah.
It's an adventure, right?
Yeah.
Any more chances? Any more chances?
So when the physical body dies, where does the soul go?
Well, the soul is there all the time, whether your physical body is alive or not. It's always there, as long as you are still human in your consciousness. So it doesn't change, and it doesn't get very excited about whether you're alive or not in physical form, because it recognizes that each individual life is just one, like a day in a person's life. It's nothing all that special unless in a particular life you have made a quantum leap in consciousness and in your ability to take charge and start making your life what you want it to be.
One of the key points that I'm going to reiterate again, I know we repeat a lot, like Terry said. Instead of thinking that the body has a soul, flip it around. The soul has a body. So that might change the question itself. If the body dies, right. And we also gave the analogy of the Mars rover and the control center back in Houston. So if the control center, the brains of the operation, is in Houston, operating the rover on the surface of Mars, if the rover blows up or gets crushed by a meteorite or something, the control center in Houston is still there, right? Still operating. It just doesn't have the vehicle, the body, to gain that experience anymore until it sends a new rover to Mars, which our soul will do for the next incarnation.
That's a good analogy.
That simple concept of flipping that around, instead of, because in the church where, my mother had me in church school, the physical body has a soul. That's how I grew up. But then it was flipped. That idea was flipped on its head when I thought of the other way around. So this isn't my real self. This is this. Okay, maybe not. Maybe the soul is the real. It doesn't seem that way, but it's all perception. And when you meditate on it, you realize, okay, this might be true. And the answers come. The validation for this comes in your own meditation. It doesn't come from us. It doesn't come from the book. We can't prove it. We have to just meditate on that.
I've seen it, like the silver cord.
Okay.
Detach, because I also help people cross over, and I've seen it. And even if I'm not there, I know when they're gone, because my guides or someone will show me that the cord was broken, and it just floats away.
Did you want to say something else, Sue?
I was just wondering, I've asked this question before in many different ways, but the soul in relation to the spirit, where, you say the soul is always there, the bodies come and go, so where's the spirit?
Oh, the spirit's always there. The soul, as Paul mentioned, it survives for millions of years during all of our lifetimes. And then at some point it comes to an end. But the spirit is always there. That never disappears. That is our essential self. That is our true self, is the spirit.
It's back to this level of consciousness. To me, I don't try to differentiate between the two, because as we move up towards God, towards the divinic plane, it's vague for us. It's not as practical. So to me, soul and spirit, same thing. That's not. I mean, that might not be what the masters say, but I'm sure there is a differentiation. To me, I'm kind of grouping the soul and spirit together as one. That's probably not entirely accurate, but our spirit is our soul. Our higher self is the same. All different semantics for that thing.
And if you think about water and the different states of water, so you have the ice, which is like the body. Then you have the liquid, which is like your mind. And if you have the gas, which is spirit. So this is all one thing. It's still water, but in different states. So maybe that helps you.
Yeah, but okay, you said vapor is the spirit. Where's the soul?
That's the vapor.
You're saying spirit and soul
Same
are
thing.
the same thing.
There is a differentiation according to the
Our soul is
teaching,
a
but
little
it's not
piece of it.
it's not
a
important
part of
really.
it.
It's
Yeah,
not.
a little-
There is a differentiation between causal body and atma, or soul and spirit, but the differentiation really isn't practical for us really right now. We know that we have a higher nature that remains after the physical body dies, and we can call it any of those terms that we've just said. Higher self.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, just to go ahead.
No, that's it.
Just to re-emphasize, if you have anything at all to do with the being present during a person's transition, do whatever you can to keep things absolutely calm, because this life review and the whole process is crucial. It's such a crucial point in that this is the culmination of that person's entire life. And if there's chaos and commotion, it disturbs everything, and it can throw off the next lifetime too, because whatever is primary in your mind at the moment of death is what will set the tone for the next lifetime. So if there is a lot of chaos and havoc going on, it's going to have long-term results. Yeah.
That answers the question that I was going to ask. What happens after the period of Bardo? How does that affect the next life that you're talking about? The incoming life?
Well, for one thing, whatever is uppermost in your mind during this period of transition, it can be weeks or days or minutes, depending on the situation, will set the tone and will be the emphasis for your next life. If you're very clear, you said that you want to be a nurse and continue your nursing.
Continue on. I love my work.
Then that will be primary in your mind at the moment of death, and that will set the tone for your next lifetime. And it'll be the same for everyone. If you're about justice and about being a judge or an attorney, that will set the tone for your next life too. And if you want to be, an altruist and to help humanity, that's what you will be doing. Yes,
What about
Deborah.
death by war? Because there's hardly anything more chaotic than that.
Then what?
By war.
Well, yes, exactly. That is exactly what happens. Whether it's a criminal act or whether it's by war, it is very violent, and it is very difficult. First of all, we'll get into this a little bit later. Keep in mind that some of these violent deaths are supposed to happen because of your karma. It may be predestined that you are going to die a violent death. However, it's possible that it's not predestined and that it's because of something someone else did, their volition, and not your karma.
In the book Many Lives, in Brian Weiss's book Many Lives, Many Masters, he talks about that. And that this therapist that was in the hospital, in, I think, Cedars of Sinai in Miami, is it?
There's
Or
one
Los
in
Angeles?
LA, but I don't know
Right.
about Miami.
Whatever, he was the head of the psychiatric department, and one of the lab technicians kept going to him because as she grew older, like over a couple of years, she was having some phobias, and there were like 10 phobias, fear of the dark, fear of swallowing, and they were getting worse and worse. And he discovered through regression that these are from past lives that ended violently. So he took her through the end of that lifetime and sort of talked her through it like we would do helping someone cross over and helping their family. And she was rid of those phobias.
But how can you say that a kid at war, children war, now he's doomed to taking that into his next lifetime? But, I mean, when you said that the way you die dictates how you start out your next lifetime.
It can affect the next lifetime.
What happened to her?
So that's why we always want to prepare ahead of time. You can prepare even when you're young, so that it would take a very enlightened person to do that. But if you go through these steps of non-attachment, letting go, making sure that everything is resolved, you would be ready at any time, even if you're 21 years old.
You could go at any time.
That's a line from a movie.
In Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, what he was experiencing was horrible and not his own choice, right? But still, the way he was processing was happening changed his energy. And I think that whatever the situation may be in someone's life, and if they have the awareness of doing that work, of not getting caught in the chaos that is happening, but just bringing, like Terry was saying, in the peace and the serenity, then their karma would be different. Am I right, Terry? Do you think?
Yeah. Anyone who dies young usually is not prepared. I know very few 21-year-olds who, have gone through the process of letting go of everything. So anyone who dies young, whether it's from karma or whether it's unintentional, is going to have a rough time because they're at the height of, desires and egocentric activities and, all kinds of emotions. They're extremely emotional usually. So that person is going to have a rough time, and it is going to have a big impact. But it's also indicative, as when we start talking about reincarnation, why do some people come into life and they are calm and peaceful and easygoing, and other people are just like a bundle of nerves from the time they're little tiny babies? They're just, you could see that they're not peaceful and calm. They have something going on inside them. So it does affect the next lifetime.
And they're pretty complex.
Yeah, exactly.
The energy that these two the descriptions you gave.
Right.
Back to the last line of the prayer of St. Francis, as you mentioned before, it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. The esoteric analysis of that line would be believing and understanding that we are the soul, dying to the lower nature and becoming alive and awake to our higher nature. The physical body takes on a different role and a different level of importance. Can you imagine what it would be like to live in your soul and almost like look down upon your physical body and use it as an instrument for working in the world, but knowing that you're this being of light and temporarily operating through that? That's how the Mahatmas do it, the masters. What if we did that? How would that change our opinion of dying? It would change it a lot. Yes.
I like to think of an alien coming in a spaceship and hovering over the earth and just kind of observing, a Dr. Spock, Mr. Spock kind of, no emotional reactions, just taking it in and saying, "Why, what crazy people these humans, these earthlings are," and just watching, just observing without any interaction or, any emotional reaction.
The different levels of consciousness, so the koshas all play a part in Bardo. And our consciousness first leaves the physical body, of course, and then the bodies die in succession, actually. And the physical body is the first to go because it's the most dense. It requires the most amount of prana or energy to operate. So when the physical body dies, we've kind of already established that consciousness doesn't just end. So what happens? Well, we can refer back to our chart here. The next level up from the physical body is the pranic, or also known as the etheric body, our energy body. It's the part of us that receives prana from nature, from the sun, from the earth, and enlivens and animates the lump of flesh. Sorry about that. So the consciousness does leave our brain, and when the physical body dies, and for a period of time, consciousness is active in the etheric body. And there have been many reports from near-death experiences and clairvoyance that there's a feeling by the person who's transitioning, a feeling of floating above the body. It's the physical separation. It's said that the etheric body is part of the physical realm. Each plane of existence has approximately 7 subdivisions. And the highest 3 subdivisions of the physical world are what we refer to as the etheric world, or the etheric realm, which is where our chakras exist, our nadis and prana exist. So our pranic body or etheric body exists after the physical body dies, and it begins to separate itself. So the person who's dying is aware of that. They become lighter. Now, of course, physical eyes wouldn't really be able to see that unless you're clairvoyant to a certain extent. And we heard earlier the idea of a silver cord, and it said that there are several connecting points. The chakras are the major ones, but the silver cord might be analogous to the Sushumna Nadi, the main central channel that the yogis talk about, which corresponds to our spinal column. Mm-hmm. So that's probably what the silver cord, or the last thread, is. That is the connection between the etheric body and the physical body, and that's the last piece that's severed when the body dies. So Theosophy teaches us that the etheric body remains for several hours after the physical body has died. So if the monitors are hooked up to the body and there's a flat line, the etheric body is active for several hours. So consciousness is active there in a kind of dreamlike state.
If you're able to control the circumstances that occurs after you die, try to make it so that your body is not disturbed for a period of time, probably, a few hours if possible. If you die at home, for example, and you're dying, just ask your family members not to call immediately, just to
That's interesting.
give you time to process, because there are part of the process occurs after the physical body is technically dead. So please try to make sure that if possible, you don't always have a chance to do that, but make sure that people know, don't be in any hurry to call and have it taken away.
And
I knew about that a long time ago, and my request is for 3 days, usually, to be kept my body cold and core for 3 days. That's one of my requests.
You're talking about before being cremated. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm talking about even before that. Just that there's a period, not 3 days, but a period of a few hours, if possible, or as long as possible, before it's moved or transported, or you have, strangers coming in and interacting with it.
And they do that a lot.
Yeah.
I've experienced that a lot with people that I know. The medical people come in and they're pumping the heart, and the person is gone.
Or even if they're not trying to resuscitate them, it's still, it's a foreign influence in the vibrations, etc.
The truth of the matter is they need the bed.
Yeah.
oh, they need the bed for something
Oh,
else.
Oh, I see what
And
you're
they need
saying.
the organs, which is what I wanted to bring up. What do you think about?
I don't have any
Organ
problem
donation.
with organ transplant.
In relation to this period, you're saying, a few hours and everything.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. Normally, it wouldn't occur in a person who is dying from natural causes. It's an accident or something. So, yeah, that actually brings in a whole new way of looking at it.
Well, could that now, how do I want to say this? Could that be because you sort of, as a human, before you died, planned this? I am an organ donor. Sort of, it's not such a surprise.
It's a form of preparation, perhaps?
Yeah. So it could be viewed maybe as that. Maybe.
And what about the whole theme of donating organs that now become a part of someone else?
Yeah.
So this
That-
other person takes on,
Yeah.
it is a part of our soul, because our soul is our body. So now we are crossing bodies.
Yeah, very interesting. That's something that I haven't considered a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you don't hear, a heart transplant patient saying I'm a hybrid. I've got this person's heart, this person, but it is.
Oh, blood transfusions too.
I wish there are times when I wish HPV were still around so she could answer. That was not even something that was talked about in 1891. So today there are things that are in our social environment that we don't have a lot of answers to, including I don't have any answers.
It's comforting to hear the teaching about what happens to the person's awareness. We're told that it's like a going to sleep. It's not much different than laying down in bed and feeling yourself drifting off to sleep when the physical body in the several hours after the physical body dies, like kind of going to sleep and a drifting off of, unless of course it's a violent thing and then it's a different situation, but this is more of a normal state. And
my grandmother was 99 3/4 when she died.
Wow.
She didn't want to be 100 because she didn't want people to make a big fuss about it.
Wow.
So anyway, she lived right next door to her son, my uncle, and the day came when she knew she was actively dying, and she said, "But I don't know how to die." And he was very wise. He said, "Well, Mom, you just close your eyes and go to sleep." And within a couple of hours, she was gone.
You know, when I was my formal education was a rehab therapist in geriatrics, and what I witnessed, I worked in a 400-bed nursing home with four levels of care, and there was a level, the ambulatory level, if you will. They knew they were dying. They could be not diagnosed with anything. They could be just walking around. And then we would go to their room and we would see suitcases packed. They would be dressed in a lovely dress or a suit, and they would take glasses or silverware from the dining room to make sure they gave it back. It was all clean and placed on their dresser. I've seen this more than 3 or 4 times. So there is something, you know, when you said, I just, go to sleep, they were ready to go
on
to
a journey.
Yeah. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, they do know. A lot of them, if they're sensitive, they do know.
So after the etheric body moves through its process of disintegration, since there's no physical body for it to be attached to, it does go through the process of kind of just back to dust, but it's not physical. It kind of just disintegrates into the ether around it. Consciousness reawakens at the next level of existence. So physical body, etheric or pranic body, and then the next level of consciousness is the emotional or astral plane of existence. So as the bodies are falling away, that's the next body or kosha that needs to be dealt with. And so consciousness does exist there after death. So several days probably go by several days of earth time before the consciousness awakens in that realm. So in the emotional world, the person that is the newly dead person will experience the realm of emotions for a period of time. And this is very interesting. So this goes back to your question about an hour ago. What is that experience like? What is it for? And how long does it last? That's completely determined based on how the person lived their life. What kind of emotions did they perpetuate, and how were they? What kind of vibrations did they create? Well, this is karmic and also a result of cause and effect, which actually is karma. So if a person created wild emotional energy all throughout their life, that has to be resolved and worked out before the astral or emotional body can pass away and die as well. And there's awareness of that working out. So it's interesting to note that Theosophy tells us this is where many ideas of hell comes from. The working out of the emotional vehicle. If a person lived in a type of hell on earth, that's what they're going to experience until the vibrations have been resolved. If the person did not live that type of life, the experience in the astral or emotional world will be very, very different and a lot shorter, because there won't be any emotions to work out, or very few of them. So this is where we see the results of the immediately ending lifetime. How long can it take and how short can it take?
So according to KH, one of the Mahatmas, the period of Kamaloka, the period where the emotions are worked out, can be as short as a few minutes, or it can be several decades. It depends on the person. So obviously the person who has prepared ahead of time, like my mother did, would have a very short period of time in Kamaloka, because there's just not that much to work out.
See, and my father had a lot to work out.
Oh, yeah.
And when he was dying, he didn't want to die.
Yeah.
Because I felt 2 things. Number 1, he was afraid.
Mm-hmm.
And number 2, he wanted more time to work things out that he should have.
Right.
And so he left, and I went to a psychic years later, and she said, your father is stuck. And I said, what does that mean? She said, he's stuck on a level. Now, however many levels, in which we believe, he was on the second level. And I know this for a fact because he came to me in a dream. And there was a fence all around this corral. And they all had white tents like the English, in the 11th century when they would set up those tents. And he and my uncle, his brother, who was just like him, and vice versa, came, and I couldn't go across the fence in this corral. And my father said to me, we need 2 cups of tea. And so I think that what he was saying, and I had to bring him 2 cups of tea to this place that was all with white tents, but they were corralled, they couldn't leave it. And I couldn't go into it. So I took that as, oh, now I get what this person a year or 2 ago said about my dad being stuck. And it was this that I read, when you're governed by certain beliefs and controls and in your life, you can carry that with you. After you.
Is this where clairvoyance would come in? Some people that do say that they have, like Jerry, that have communicated with folks on the other side. Are they in this plane possible of communication still? Because if they're not, then how are they communicating if they've moved on to?
I think I've gotten several different periods, and this explained it to me. Why I was able to talk to some where they came to me and not others.
It's 4 o'clock already.
We'll discuss this more in the next class because we're at the end of our time. But in my own experience, personal experience, as well as the 7 years where I investigated spiritualism and spiritual mediums, I think there is a lot of information that can't be verified. And I'm not sure how much of it is our perception of things the way they are and how we interpret them, and how much of it is actual. According to the Mahatmas and to the information we have, first of all, it's not a good idea to try to contact people on the other side, because they've got their period of adjustment and their process that they're going through. So we wouldn't disturb them any more than we would disturb a person who is sleeping. So they need to go through that on their own. This is a very personal time. It is not a time for us to try to interact with them. And I think that we can actually sometimes disturb their period of processing.
But I think that you can also help them.
Sometimes.
Because if they are stuck, that's been my experience with my father.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying that, because he was stuck for a long time and we were communicating. And then I asked for his help with something, to make a long story short. He helped me. And that was the last time that he and I communicated. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what to make of it at first, but I believe that he was able to fulfill one of his karmas by doing that, and was able then to move up and go back to the higher levels, which he wasn't otherwise. That's, just for whatever it's worth. That's been my experience.
And I can understand that. I've had people who have crossed over come to me. I've never asked for them. I have asked for some because of personal requests, and I'm not a medium. And so, and I didn't know a lot of things, but some didn't come. But some spirits come, and I don't ask them to come. And they say, tell this to my son. Tell my son his mother is not really a mother. You'll get his attention. And I did, and she wasn't. And he said, how do you know this? And then he told me all about his mother through tears, through reliving his childhood. So maybe, and I didn't know what that was all about, except I was the carrier of a message. That's it. So, and it helped this person a lot because he held it in and held it in. So,
I have a question for you. Do you think that if we do try to communicate with them and they do not need it or want it, that we would actually disturb them?
You
Or
can.
are they impervious to that?
No, you can disturb them if you're actively trying to communicate with them. And in getting back to your comment, a number of years ago, I was like you. I would receive messages and information from people, and I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. So I purposely cut it off. Annie Besant did the same thing. When she got involved in politics, she cut off this psychic activity, clairvoyant activity. I just didn't feel right about it. So I had people that say, oh, can you see if you can contact my father who died a few years ago? And I just, tell them I don't do that anymore. And so that's just my own personal experience.
and I don't. I mean, that's not what I'm here to do. But if spirits come to me, whether in a dream, they'll give me a message, or while I'm sitting in a car, they've done that. And which is not always a good thing, but I don't know how to control that. I didn't ask them.
Yeah, I cut it off. I just stopped paying attention to it. And I haven't had any more since then. We do need to, we're at the end of time.
Yes, it's 4:05.
Well, our time.
The end of time.
Our time.
Any last comments or questions? Mom, did you have something? Okay. Everyone online. Oh, Esther, there's. She's from Australia. She's there. Oh no.
The next day.
Oh, you
She
could
didn't get the notice.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Let me. Oh, do you want me to
It wouldn't hurt to have it on first.
have it on for? Okay. So. Okay, Roger.
Last meeting, we talked about getting more people involved in the Theosophical Society. And I just happened to take a look at some of the people that if you join would be armed shoulder to shoulder with. Thomas Edison, Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru, I can't pronounce his first name, and also his daughter Indira Gandhi. They're all Theosophical. So if you want to join, you got some high-powered company. Okay?
That's the next meeting.
Huh?
The next meeting, next.
Oh, in next week, 2 weeks.
Let's see.
The 17th is.
Yes, it will be in 2 weeks.
The 17th is Father's Day. Does that affect anything?
Oh,
2 weeks is
Um,
Father's Day.
we'll decide. We'll
I
send an
think-
email.
Yeah, I don't think so.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
I think this should be 2 hours long.
Yeah.
We used to do it.
When you said it's after 4.
I know.
I know.
We used to do 2 hours. We used to. We decided to make it shorter.
Oh, okay.
Which means.